One thing I've been pondering this past week is just this idea of an unrealized potential. Like as in someone who has this potential for greatness or a potential to do amazing things. They've just been given a lot of God-given gifts and abilities and talents, but then they just never really get there. They never really realize this potential, right? They never get to the fulfillment of everything that they could do. And like again, the easy examples of this are just sports, and like a kid has a lot of real good potential and they just never get there. Or it's a classic, where your NFL team drafts the top prospect and you're just like, this is going to be great, and then he's just a total flop. There's a lot of unrealized potential. And then even just in our own lives, I'm sure if we scratch the surface of our life, not too terribly hard, we can probably realize that, there's probably a few things in my own life where I never really reached my potential. Just whatever it is. And it's not always our fault. Sometimes it's just the circumstances of our life. Sometimes it's just the things that we go through and we never have the opportunity, whatever it is. But it's just, again, this idea of unrealized potential. A very, very famous example of this, and this guy is very famous. His name's John. Okay, John, he grew up in a very wealthy family, like uber rich. His dad was a very wealthy businessman, and then his mom came from a bunch of money, so he was just set financially in his life. And then of course, everything that goes along with that went along with that. He grew up in a great neighborhood. He grew up with a great house and clothes and food and all that. He went to the best schools. He was very well educated, all these sorts of things. The thing, though, is when he would take over for his dad and take over the family business for a couple of days, it would always go real bad. This kid had a lot of potential. Again, his family saw this, he wasn't dumb, and so they always this kid has a lot of potential in life. He joined the military later, and so he had a lot of leadership potential. He was always just a natural leader growing up, all these sorts of things. But then when he started running the family business, he every single time he took the reins, he started running it straight into the ground. And it just became a real point of frustration, especially for his dad. And he really started to fall apart. The relationship between them really started to fall apart to the point that John just completely renounced his family inheritance, the family business, everything, and he just went off on his own. And he became homeless. And he began living in poverty. And it just never got better his whole life long. And so again, this is just a classic case where there's so much potential, so much that this kid could have done. It could have been a great politician and everything. But he just never realized that potential. The reason I've been thinking about this all week, this idea of unrealized potential, it's because of this line in our first reading today. Okay, if you're journeying with us through this unlocking the mystery of the Bible thing, or if you're studying the scriptures a little bit more, our first reading was from the book of Numbers, classic book. Which comes right after the story of the people. They're freed from slavery in Egypt. Right? So Moses leads the people from slavery to freedom, but then they're wandering in the desert for 40 years. Numbers, here we go. In this particular scene that we had, God's raising up a new generation of leaders. He recognizes that Moses needs a little bit of help, and so there's the Spirit of God is poured out on a group of people to help Moses to lead the people. What happens in this scene, though, is, the Spirit of God's poured out on these people, but apparently the Spirit was poured out on a few other people too. And so some of these people are just like, that's not right, Moses. Why do they get the Spirit too? It's just supposed to be for us. They're getting really sassy. And so Moses points out to them, corrects them, and he's just like, what did he say? Would that the Spirit of God was given to everyone. He's like, wouldn't it be great if everyone got God's Spirit? Wouldn't that be just amazing? Again, this is an Old Testament foreshadowing of the fact that anyone here that's baptized, you've been given God's Spirit. So Moses already foresees, wouldn't it be great if everybody got God's Spirit? Okay, but then why? Why does Moses care? Why is it such a big deal that everybody get God's Spirit? Moses says, other thing he says is, would that they get God's Spirit? Why? Would that all of God's people were prophets. That's why Moses is so intent on this. He's like, why? If everybody had the Spirit of God, everyone would be a prophet. Prophets is what Moses is going for. If we were all prophets, the world would be a completely different place. And again, any one of you that's baptized, in our baptism, just go to a baptism, I tell you this all the time, when you're anointed with the chrism oil on your head, the priest reminds you, you've now shared in Jesus' mission as priest, as king, and as prophet. So every single one of us that's baptized, We share in this mission of being a prophet. So this is the point then. What Moses is getting at is he sees an incredible potential for each and every single one of us. He sees an incredible potential for God's people if they were to become prophets. But for us, and this is why I was thinking about this idea of unrealized potential, you and I, all of us that are baptized, we are prophets, or at least we have the potential to be prophets. This incredible potential to be a prophet. But have we latched on to that? Are we living that vocation that each one of us has to be a prophet? Right? Are we embracing this, taking this up, and embracing our potential to be a prophet? That's the big question today. Of course, though, the first question is, what is a prophet? Because most people, when they think about prophets, they probably think about like the people that tell the future. There's like, aren't the prophets the people that predict the future, Father? I don't know if I'm going to do that. And that's okay. We'll get to that later. That's not the prophet's number one job. The prophet's number one job, here you go, ready? A prophet, the first and foremost, a prophet, a biblical prophet, as Scripture informs us, a biblical prophet is someone who sees clearly. A prophet sees with the eyes of God himself. They have the divine vision. They see things as God sees them. That's the first and foremost thing that a prophet is. Secondly, then, a prophet is going to feel as God feels. So, for instance, we're good Americans, right? So when we see random things happening that are unjust, we go, that's not great. Yeah, but then we move on with our life. A prophet sees that same situation, and they're not indifferent to it. They can't just let things slide. They just feel intensely. They see things as God sees them. They feel that intense feeling of God's feeling. And so they're no longer indifferent to anything. So that's who a prophet is. What a prophet then does with that is they then begin to live this and operate out of this vision in radical ways. In radical ways they live this out. But then also they help others to see this way as well. And that's why if you go read the scriptures, prophets are never, ever popular. I don't know if you've ever done this. I don't know if you've ever talked to somebody and they're 100% convinced that the way they see things is right. And then you're just like, that's not right at all. And then you tell them that and then they're just like, you're stupid. So then nobody likes being told that they're wrong. So prophets are never popular. They're just never popular because they go around telling people, you're wrong. So that's how that is. Okay, so why is Moses so intent that we all become prophets? Why is he so intent? This would be a good thing if everyone in the world were a prophet. Why? Well, because then we would all see clearly. We would all see things as God sees them. That's why he wants this. Then, two, we would all feel as God feels and no longer be indifferent to anything going on in the world. All of a sudden, we begin to operate, to see things, to feel things, to operate just as God himself does. So again, it's not just Moses saying, hey, everybody, we need to follow these 10 commandments a whole lot better. And if we all did that, man, things would be so much better. Moses is saying, no, we have this incredible potential. There's a potential for each and every single one of us to operate and to live and to see like God himself. We can literally share in God's own life. That's our incredible potential. So why is it so hard? It's because it's not just like magic. It is a potential. We have to be the ones to then latch on to this and live it out. And it takes a lot of work. I mean, I've told you this before. I you all know this. I grew up in Wichita. Everyone thinks there's this huge homeless problem in Wichita. And it's just no, it's just a big city. There's homeless people. Go to any big city, you'll find homeless people there. But it's very easy then, see how casually I talk about this? It's very easy as a Wichitan to then just be like, it's just the homeless people. Yep, no big deal. Or when a homeless person, and you're walking through downtown Wichita, and a homeless person comes up to you and they're just like, hey, you got $5? You go, no, man. Why? Because you know what homeless people do with cash, right? And if you don't know, I'll tell you after Mass. We don't need to tell all the kids. Right, we know. So there's a prudential reason why we don't just shell out cash to homeless people. But what happens? Very easily, it's easy to become indifferent to it. Whereas if I saw the homeless person as Christ himself, as God himself sees a homeless person, if I saw them with the vision of God, if I began to operate that way, if I was no longer indifferent to it, I would see that person as my own brother. Right? If I ever saw my actual brother sleeping on the sidewalk in Wichita, my response would be very different than random homeless person sitting on the side of the road ask me for $5. If I saw my actual brother homeless on the street of Wichita, holy smokes, there'd be a big response. But that's the difference between me and a prophet. A prophet would never allow something like that to slide. They feel intensely, they can't be indifferent to anything that they see. Whereas most of us, we can go, nah, just a homeless guy. You see what I mean? But then you just apply this to anything. So you literally apply this to anything. How do we see Sunday? Again, this is my favorite thing to talk about, you know. How do we see Sunday? Is Sunday just part of my weekend? Or is Sunday, do I view it as the Lord's day? Marriage. Is marriage my vacation buddy for life? Or is this the person that God is giving to me and who I've given my life to help me grow in holiness and to raise a family together? Kids. Are kids just my, the nice little thing to have in my life where I've got my house, I've got my dog, I've got my husband, my wife, and I've got some kids? Or are kids an incredible gift from God? This beautiful gift that I now have the responsibility to raise them. Money. Is money the stuff that I go for in life, and money's, man, that's the bestest thing? Or is money just kind of a tool? It's just kind of a means to an end. It's just money. Politics, you go down the list. Anything. Sports, anything. How do I view things? Because this is the big difference when it comes to our faith. Our faith, the church teaches, our faith teaches us to see. Our faith isn't I live my life and then on Sunday I go to church. Our faith is I now see everything in life differently. That's what's going on. But that's seen as a prophet sees. That's seeing things in a very different way. The world teaches us to look at things and to operate one way. For us, we are meant and called to see things differently and thus to operate in a different way. So go back to John. Okay, John, very famous. That guy never realized his potential in life, ended up poor, ended up homeless, ended up as a failed businessman. So according to the lenses of the world, he was a complete, total, and utter failure. Never reached any potential ever. And that's what his dad told him. His dad was just like, you bum, have fun in your cave being homeless. John was actually not a failure at all. John was an incredible man, and he was actually what we call a prophet. John lived out his life in a very prophetic way. And actually, John went on to change the world. John grew up in Italy. He actually was called Giovanni. That's Italian for John. His full name was Giovanni di Pietro de Bernardone. Just a good Italian name there. And he grew up in this little town in Italy called Assisi. And most people didn't call him John. Most people called him the nickname his dad gave him, which was Francesco. Or as we say in English, Francis, yes. Francis of Assisi, there it is. Right? Some of you probably have a statue of him in your garden. That's how famous and life-changing this guy was. Right? In the eyes of the world, Francis of Assisi was a total failure. Total failure. But actually he wasn't, because in the divine vision, and in the way that God sees things, in the way that God operates, Francis reached a potential that few people ever do. Okay, Francis, he was really bad at business, but do you know why? Do you know why he made such poor financial decisions? It's because he was always giving away the family money to the poor. His dad didn't like that. Okay, when he joined the military, he did join the military, but during this time in the military, he discovered that your friends matter and who you hang out with matters. And he discovered that the military life wasn't always the bestest sort of company to hang out with for him. And he realized he actually needed to hang out with the poor a lot more. So when he got home from the military and kept handing out money to the poor and kept hanging out with the poor, his dad, that's why that friction began to grow between him and his dad. Eventually, just breaking that relationship, and Francis went off to be a homeless guy and to be poor. Yeah, but Francis's life, he was not a failure. Francis literally changed. That's why people put statues of him in their garden. Right? Francis went on to change the world so much. The question then is for us, right, are we going to reach our potential as prophets as well? And not are we all going to go live in caves. Again, Francis was called to live his life as a prophet in his particular way, but are we going to fulfill our potential as prophets? Specifically, are we going to see as God sees? Are we going to begin to see that way? Are we going to begin to feel as God feels? Are we going to become not indifferent to everything that goes on in the world? Right? Are we going to begin to help open other people's eyes to this vision as well? And then, are we going to begin to live this and operate this way in radical and different ways. This is one of the reasons why I try to share so many dumb stories that I do, because very, very easily we can begin to see the power of living this way, and then what happens when we don't live this way. This is why I talk about my crazy family. They are crazy. Don't tell my parents. They're a little crazy. But they're crazy because they're prophetic. In this day and age, you don't have 10 kids. That's a dumb idea. Very dumb idea. If you're operating the way that the world teaches you to operate and to see how the world teaches you to see, you're supposed to have 1.3 kids. That's what you're supposed to do. But when you see life as a prophet and you see as God sees, having 10 kids is a thing. My family, we go to Mass every single day. In the eyes of the world, that's a stupid decision. It's a waste of time. But when you see as God sees, all of a sudden that's not. We would pray the rosary every day as a family. We would eat dinner together as a family every night. Those are dumb things to do, because in the world's eyes, the world's vision of life, you have a lot of other things you should be giving your time to. A lot of other things you should be doing. But prophetically, my parents said, no, we need to focus on the family first, and then everything else comes after that. God, family, then everything else. And that's a prophetic way to live. This is also why I tell my other favorite stories, like the man from China. I'm not going to tell it again. The man from China, the guy that I met on the flight to Chicago that had everything in life. These people, they get everything they've ever wanted, what the world tells them they should want, but then they end up sad and depressed and miserable and cynical and jaded. Okay, this is what I mean. Each one of us has the potential to live as a prophet, but it takes us saying, I'm going to actually do that. And by the grace of God, actually begin to do it. So today, as we conclude this little series on sacred scripture on the Bible, my biggest point through all of it is this. My goal is not that all of us become biblical scholars and I can hand you a Bible and you can tell me all the Greek and Hebrew in it and blah, blah. No. The goal of it is that as we begin to immerse ourselves more and more in scripture, we begin to take on the biblical vision. We begin to see things differently. We begin to see and to feel and to operate like God himself, and as God himself reveals to us. That's the big thing, whether you become a biblical scholar or not. Each and every Sunday we come to this Mass and we read from the sacred scriptures. I don't know if you were paying attention to the second reading from James. If you didn't, go back and read that and then tell me how you feel about money going forward today. Right? If we allow the scriptures to speak to us, we will begin to see differently. And then we will become those prophets that we have the potential to be. And not only will our lives radically change, but then the lives of those around us will as well.